The sneak to vertical rolls. In this video, we'll cover the sneak to vertical rolls from the number 6 opposing solo perspective. As with the previous maneuver, the horizontal rolls, this maneuver is mostly about timing and will take practice to get right. Unlike the previous maneuver, however, simply robotically flying the numbers won't guarantee an on-time hit, so you'll have to pay close attention to number 5's radio calls and find your sweet spot to make it work. Once you get a sense for the timing, though, you'll be able to make an on-time hit consistently, which is designed and guaranteed to startle the crowd. Briefing. The maneuver begins with both aircraft exiting the showbox on the behind crowd heading at about 7,500 feet AGL and 2 miles abeam. While number 5 picks up a crowd left heading to set up the sneak pass, number 6 will continue behind the crowd and maintain altitude. When number 5 calls their turning in to start their maneuver, number 6 will perform a split S and dive back towards center point, aiming to be around 0.3 nautical miles behind number 5 all the way in. As they approach center point, both aircraft will accelerate to just below the speed of sound, with number 5 flying less than 50 feet above the ground, crossing show center. As number 5 clears behind crowd to the right, number 6 will pass directly over the crowd and execute a dramatic vertical climb, ending with a series of aileron rolls. Passing through 10,000 feet, number 6 will pull to the horizon and hold the aircraft in inverted flight just above stall speed for a few seconds, before rolling wings level and clearing out of the showbox behind the crowd. This maneuver is an attention-grabbing tour de force. It's fast, loud, and has the highest G-forces in the entire show for the opposing solo pilot. When done right, the crowd will never know what hit them. Let's get into it. Walkthrough. Here we are again in the cockpit of our F-18C Hornet. So we have just cleared from the horizontal rolls, and we are now facing behind the crowd, and we are setting up for the sneak to vertical roll. Now this maneuver from the opposing solo perspective is very similar conceptually to the MRT, because basically our entire job is to set up a rejoin, or in this case, a hit on center point at the same time that number 5 is crossing center point, or very close. We actually want to be slightly behind him. And so a lot of what we're doing is trying to make sure that we are at the right distance from center point relative to number 5, and that will depend on the radio calls that number 5 is giving us. And the distances we're looking for in this maneuver are going to be 0.2 to 0.3 nautical miles behind number 5's calls. So if you have watched our MRT video, and I recommend that you do, you will recall that I was recommending being 1 nautical mile behind number 5 all the way in for that maneuver. This maneuver, we don't have to wait for an entire maneuver like the MRT in order to set up the hit. So we just want to be just fractionally behind number 5 once we get to center point. Because the idea here is that we are surprising the crowd. They've been watching the Diamond's precision flying in a very graceful maneuver, and then boom, we hit them with a really low pass from number 5, and then right screaming over their heads comes us, the opposing solo, before we pull hard into the vertical. There's a great line that number 7, the announcer, will give, which is, now that number 5 and number 6 have got your attention, because this is definitely an attention-getting maneuver. 2 jets screaming overhead right on the edge of the sound barrier. It's very eye-catching, very ear-catching, and very arresting, and it's a lot of fun to fly. So the major concept for us is that we are going to be right behind number 5, about 0.2 to 0.3 nautical miles. But the rest of the thought process is very similar to what we do in the MRT. We don't want to get further than 5 miles from center point. We want to stay inside the approved airspace for the air show. And we also want to stay under Mach. We don't want to break the sound barrier. But other than that, we are basically just managing our airspeed and our angles so that we end up on center point right when we need to be there. So what I am looking for as I'm heading in is I do not want to be any further than 4.5 miles from center point before I turn in. Because what number 5 is going to do is he's going to turn in and he wants to be doing 0.96 Mach when he crosses center point, which means he is going about as fast as it's possible to go without breaking the sound barrier, and we can't go any faster than that in order to beat him there. So we need to be closer than him to center point so that way we can make sure that we are on time for our hit. Because if we get behind, we aren't going to be able to catch up if he is riding the edge of the envelope like he is intending to do. Now, there are some contract speeds and distances, which we'll talk about in a minute, but conceptually, I'm just thinking I want to be ahead of number 5 so I have some room to play with, which means normally I want to wait for his radio call that says that he's turning in before I turn in. I usually use that as a cue, but if I see 4.5 nautical miles show up on my HUD, I turn in anyway, whether he's given the call or not, so that way I know that I'm ahead of him and I have that extra room to play with that I need. So, flying away, usually number 5 will give some radio indication during this point where he's going to talk about what the next maneuver is and that we're clearing behind the crowd. But for us, we're just powering up. We're trying to gain as much speed as we can and get as much distance as we can so we can come back in, because we want to be carrying a lot of speed once we turn in for the maneuver. Okay, we'll pause here real quick and talk about just one more thing before we get into the rest of it. So we're approaching that 4 to 4.5 mile mark. We're getting ready to turn in. We're trying to go fast, and what we want to do is perform a split S. So we're going to roll onto our back and pull the nose back around so that we're pointed towards center point. You'll notice that I am just slightly offset from center point here. So we can't just do a perfect split S, perfect 180 and pull. We're going to roll kind of over our right shoulder. And when I'm rolling to the right, I'm actually going to look over my right shoulder so I spot the field, and then I'm just going to fly visually in order to get set up on the right heading. And you'll remember that the heading we want to look for is 155. That's the away from crowd, directly away from crowd heading. And if we're on that, then we will pass right over center point. So we're about to hit 4 miles and we're waiting for 5's radio call. If we hear it, we turn with him. If we don't, 4.5, we go anyway. All right, so I thought I heard it, but it didn't come. There he goes. Okay, so we come in. I didn't like it, and I just moved because I knew I was going to get too far. So there's center point there, over my shoulder, bringing it in. I want to pause real quickly here and talk about a few more things. So even though I've rolled over and I want to maintain speed, I can't break the sound barrier. And because I'm coming in from almost 7,000 feet and I'm descending almost straight down, it means I'm going to be going really fast on the way down. So I almost always pull all the way back to idle on the way down from this split S. Then once I start to level out again, I will feed power back in so that we're not late into center point. So you'll notice I'm already flying 0.74 and I've still got 0.3 nautical miles to go over here. So we're screaming and we want to stay screaming all the way in. But as soon as we hear number 5's radio call, 4 miles mark, and he'll also give his Mach number, 0.76 or however fast he's going, we want to give him some indication of where we are relative to him. So if we are at 4.3 nautical miles and we're at least his same Mach number, then we will say on time, which means we think, based on what we know from his radio call and what we're seeing in our instruments, that this hit is going to be on time. Once we say on time once, it is not necessary to repeat that every mile that number 5 gives his radio call. He needs to give his radio call every mile because that's the only way we know where we need to be, and that's the only way he can give us an indication. So we're flying off of him. But if that changes, if we're not going to be on time, maybe we get ahead of him, then we need to give him an indication when he calls his next mile, like 3 miles, mark 0.82. And supposing that we come in right when he says 3 miles, we're also at 3 miles and we're doing 0.85. We're ahead. So we give him the indication, we tell him we're ahead. That gives him 2 pieces of information. One, that he knows that we know where we are and what we need to do to fix it. And then also it allows him to make some adjustments to make that hit work, give us a little bit of room. Ahead is better than behind. If we are behind, suppose he hits 3 miles mark 0.85 and we're only at 3.5 and we're flying 0.82. If we're behind, he can also give us a little room by not increasing his speed too much. But we can't get too far behind because he's only got so much speed he can lose before he has to just get back on the throttle in order to make the sneak pass be as explosive as it's supposed to be. So it is our job to make sure that we are right on time. It will take practice to learn to do this, but it is not too hard to do once you get the hang of it. You'll get a sense for where you need to be in the sky and about how fast you need to be going in order to make sure that first 4 mile call you're at 4.3, 4.2. And then from that point on, you just ride it in and it's not too much trouble as long as you're not going crazy. I almost never go into burner headed back towards center point. If you need burner, it's there for you, but you shouldn't need it. Honestly, coming out of the sky, performing that split S at 7,000 feet and dropping back down to about 500 feet AGL, you'll have plenty of speed. So it's just a matter of managing your throttle and managing your angle, and you'll be just fine. So we're coming in, 4 miles mark, doing 500. He's calling his distances, probably 3 miles mark there, 0.85. We're doing 0.80, we're a little slow. You can see we're actually slowing down, so I must be a little ahead of him on this. And then right about now, number 5 will give one of his final radio calls, which is 1 mile mark first stage, which means he's a mile from center point and he's in first stage afterburner. He's going to be going as fast as he will go the entire maneuver, and this is the last chance to fix anything. As long as we're close enough, we're within about 0.3 nautical miles from him, we're all good to go, and then I will give the sugar call smoke on, which means I'm in the right spot, and then that is actually where we need to turn our smoke on, because this maneuver, in order to catch the eye of the audience and hold it for the next bit, we want to make sure that smoke is on, so we're looking as fancy as we can. Okay, we're a mile and a half away. We're screaming 0.75 Mach. Right about now, regardless of where I am relative to Chariot, I'm probably going to throw it into military power or even burners in order to make sure that I have enough speed to go up the hill, because at center point, we're going to pull full back pressure, about 90% onset, and then to fully to the stops after that. And we're going to pull to 80 degrees nose high, just like we did for the horizontal rolls. And then once we get 80 degrees nose high, we'll neutralize those controls, let the jet settle for a second or two, and then begin left aileron rolls. And we'll do as many as is necessary until we hit 10,000 feet AGL, or whatever the ceiling is that day. But 10,000 feet AGL is the contract altitude, at which point we will cease the roll, and then we will clear by pulling our nose to the horizon, so we'll be inverted, and ideally we want to clear behind the crowd, which means we will clear, in this case, 334 as the heading. Now, when you're doing all of those rolls, it is very difficult to maintain your directional sense, and so if you don't clear in the right direction, that's okay. You'll just have to solve a little bit of a geometry problem again in order to set up for the next maneuver. And we'll talk about that in the following video, but just know that one of the aspects of this maneuver that you'll have to get used to is clearing in the wrong direction, because you do need to get out of the airspace as soon as you can, because the Diamond plus number 5 are coming in for the line abreast loop, and you need to be out of their way, and they're going to top out at that loop probably 8,000, 10,000 feet. So you need to be out of their way when you do that. So we're coming in. I'm in full military power. Smoke is on. We'll see 5 clearing across our nose right there. And then I call ready, hit it, which is a sugar call, but it's just to let 5 and everybody else know that I'm doing the maneuver. And then there's 80 degrees nose high, let it neutralize, and then left rolls. And I will also say ready, hit it when I begin those rolls. Again, sugar call, let everybody know what's going on. And then here we are coming to 10,000 feet. I will stop my roll, and I will pull my nose to the horizon. So we're inverted, and we got lucky this time. We are pretty close to the heading we want. Remember, we wanted 334, and we're at 344, so not too bad. We'll hold it inverted. This is fun. This is just a little thing that I've seen the real pilots do. They'll just hang out inverted and hang it on the blades and just fly inverted for a bit and just sort of skid the jet across the sky way up here. Because the crowd's watching you. The Diamond and number 5 haven't come in for their loop yet. You are center stage. This is your turn to take a bow. And the best way to take a bow is to do something cool. So flying inverted, really slow speed at a fairly high altitude like this is a great way to do that. And then once you have done that a bit, you've regained a little bit of airspeed so that you can actually roll out. Then you will roll out. And then at that point, you are clearing out of the airspace to make sure that you have gotten out of the way for the next maneuver, which is that line of rest loop. At this point, depending on which direction you are facing, now that you've cleared from your vertical rolls, you'll have to do a little bit of thinking and problem solving to figure out how you're going to get to the next place you need to be in the sky, which is the beam setup for the 4-point hesitation roll. And that setup, we need to be crowd right, and we need to be at that 4-mile mark. So however you've cleared from your vertical roll, you need to make sure that you can get to that spot in the sky. So you need to be thinking about that. As soon as you roll wings level, that's where your brain is going, is how do I get to that spot on time? At Coboletti, where we're looking, is going to be off the coast over there. That coast is conveniently about 5 miles away from the center point. And so I'm going to look to slowly bring my jet around so that I can be over that coastline right about the time that number 5 is going to ask me whether I am a beam. We'll talk more about that in the next video when we talk through the 4-point and the setup for the 4-point, but it's good to be thinking ahead about when you're completing this maneuver, because this is one of the more variable parts of the show, because you will clear in different directions. The line of rest loop may take different times. Depending on atmospheric conditions, your speed and your altitude will adjust. And you just got to make sure that you're at about 4.5 to 5 miles, and you're also at the right altitude you want to be at. And again, we'll go through these details in the next video. But you want to be thinking ahead about where you need to be for the next maneuver. Demo. Let's take a look at an example of the sneak to vertical rolls from that recent Coboletti show that we've been using in previous videos. Pay close attention to the way that I'm using altitude and heading angle in order to adjust my timing so that I set up the perfect hit just a few seconds behind number 5 at center point.
Cherry is circling 5 miles for the sneak to vertical rolls. And Cherry is turning in 5 miles for the sneak to vertical rolls.
Altitude. Altitude. Altitude.
4 miles, mark 0.78.
On time.
3 miles, mark 0.86.
On time.
2 miles, mark 0.92. 1 mile, mark 0.93, burners.
Smoke on.
Cherry's clear.
Ready, hit it. Stand by, roll. $10,000 clouds, no factor.
Clouds no factor. High show clear. State 7-1.
High show, state 7-2.
Train circling 4 miles for the solo loop. And Cherry's turning in 4 miles for the solo loop. Web is clear 8.
And that's how the Legacy Blue Solos perform the sneak to vertical rolls. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel, where you can find the rest of the Legacy Blue Solos tutorial series, as well as full side-by-side show sequences and debriefs. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the flight line.